Tycoons of Small Biz, a podcast where small business owners are celebrated as the backbone of the American economy. Each week, we introduce you to tycoons who share their stories and advice so that small business owners may learn from their experiences. Tycoons is powered by Backbone Planning Partners. Join us now as our hosts connect you to today's Tycoons.
Good afternoon, Tycoons, and welcome to today's episode of Tycoons of Small Biz. I'm your host here, as always, Austin Peterson. Today, coming to you from our office in Las Vegas. I traded Phoenix for Las Vegas this week, hoping for some cooler temperatures, and it just did not work out. Derek, our guest today, he wants to tell me that 2 degrees difference should make a difference to the way that I feel, but it's just not working. So if this is the first time you're listening to our episode, welcome, or to our podcast, welcome, and we're glad that you're here. Today's guest is Derek Turner. Derek is, I would call him a serial entrepreneur. He recently did an acquisition, and he's done some other acquisitions and had some other transactions in the past that we're going to unpack and talk about. So Derek Turner is the owner of Rolla Shield in Tempe, Arizona. Derek, welcome to the show.
Thanks a lot for having me, Austin.
Yeah, Derek, excited to unpack this with you. It's we've known each other for a couple of months. You and I met, and then you and I are actually in a different group together where we kind of talk about different opportunities from a business standpoint. But looking forward to kind of talking to you for about 45 minutes or so about what you've done here currently and what you did in the past, and kind of unpacking that. So it's going to be fun.
Great, I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah. So let's start first by having you tell us a little bit about you personally. So, we'll get into the business stuff, a lot of stuff to cover there, but where'd you grow up? What was life like for you growing up? Where'd you go to school? If you went and got a college education, do you have a wife or a spouse or a partner? Do you have any kids? Any of those sorts of things?
Yeah, for sure. Well, I'm the middle son of a violinist and an entrepreneur. So I have an older and a younger brother. I grew up here in Phoenix, Arizona, for most of my life. And like I said, my dad, he's an entrepreneur. He started a couple different companies, and eventually the one that took off was an online education business. But growing up, he was starting startups in the 90s in Phoenix. So you can imagine the VC capital availability that he was running into back then. So he started a bunch of really interesting businesses, but ultimately unsuccessful businesses. And that helped me as a child actually swear off of entrepreneurship. When I graduated from high school, I made 2 promises to myself. I would never move back to Arizona, and I would never become an entrepreneur. And I broke both of those promises in short order. But to fast forward a bit, I went to college in New York City at Columbia, and then eventually got a graduate degree as well. I'm married. I'm celebrating 10 years with my wife. We met actually here in Phoenix in high school, and we now have 2 sons who are 4.5 and 2.5, and we have our first daughter on the way in about a month and a half. So a growing family. My life is filled with noise and chaos, but a whole lot of love. And that's me personally.
Yeah, that's great. So do you play any instruments? You said it sounds like your mom was the violinist.
Yes. So I learned piano and played clarinet, but didn't really pursue it after the middle of high school. But I'd like to think that I've got some music education that I can pass off to my kids.
Yeah, I love music personally. It's a great love of mine, but I've never spent a whole lot of time learning instruments or anything like that. I love to sing. But I've never been, classically trained or anything like that. But I do have a daughter that's, she actually just turned 20, and she started playing the cello pretty young and went all the way through high school. And she's a pretty gifted cellist. And now I look at her and I think, why in the world are you not still playing, right? She didn't want to study it in college. That's fine. But I just see it sitting there, and for the most part, she doesn't live at our house, but she's home right now for a month or two, and it sits there in the corner. And I'm thinking, you got, I don't know, multiple $1,000 cello sitting in the corner.
Yeah,
you've got this talent that's just completely going unused. It's been well over a year since she's played it at all.
Yeah,
I think it's a waste.
Well, you know what? She has the strength of character that was built through the years of practice and playing it. So that's going to stay with her no matter what, even if the cello gathers some dust.
Yeah. Yeah, no, there's definitely some truth to that. There's a lot of good things inside of your mind, work ethic, all those sorts of things that happen when you read music, play an instrument, all those sorts of things.
Hmm.
For sure.
Yeah. So it was a great household to grow up in. My older brother played the cello, and so it was this nice combination of kind of risk taking, entrepreneurship, kind of analytical stuff, and then my mom, who's more of an artist and a musician, and I feel like I got some good balance out of that kind of house.
Yeah, I'm sure you did. So tell us what you studied at Columbia.
So I went for a very non-practical approach, and so I studied political science and anthropology. So it was just purely, I guess, an intellectual exercise. I learned a lot about leadership and about things like that, but it was definitely more of a liberal arts approach and not so much as a directly to the workforce kind of education.
Yeah. Well, I'm the same way. I actually have an undergraduate degree in French, of all things. And so,
Nice.
yeah, I tell people all the time. So, of course, logically, I became a financial planner. Why would I do anything else with a French degree?
Yeah, that's funny. Well, yeah, I guess we both found our way
Yeah,
eventually.
exactly. We did figure it out. All right. So now just give us kind of a breakdown of after Columbia and then what kind of led you to where you are today. And then we'll jump into Roller Shield.
Yeah, for sure. So when I was graduating, I had done some internships while I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do as a career. And I had tried a bunch of things. I had tried nonprofits, I had tried large corporations, even a lobbying firm in DC. And through all of it, it just didn't resonate. And one of the big conclusions that I arrived at the end of college was that as a kid, looking at my dad being an entrepreneur, I had internalized that message as, oh, to be an entrepreneur is to just be unwilling to work for somebody and to just put your family through hardship while you're trying to pursue your kind of, your kind of selfish dream of not working for somebody. And that's a very one-dimensional and childish, viewpoint. I think by the time I graduated college, what I had realized was that riskier paths, whether it's entrepreneurship and starting your own business or it's something else that's a little bit off the beaten path, it's much more about like the ability to create value and the ability to just produce something that otherwise wouldn't be there if it weren't for you. I just felt a lot of conviction that at the end of the day that my dad had pursued it because he had visions of what to create in the world and what people could be blessed with, but if he were to create it. And by the time I graduated, I had realized that I wanted to do something risky and off the beaten path that would allow me to really be challenged and to create. And that led me, of all places, to Detroit, Michigan, a city I'd never been to before, but I had heard about this city that had this really exciting and energetic community trying to bring the city back. And long story short, I ended up finding a startup in Detroit to work at. Actually through a program called Venture for America, which is like Teach for America, but for placing graduates into cities that are maybe out of the coasts to help build and create jobs in those cities through entrepreneurship. So I ended up working for a very early stage startup there, and then ended up joining the founding team of a VC-backed coding bootcamp startup. So I was there for going from 0 to 1 in that case. And we ended up doing some great work, workforce programs where we were training these folks who had no kind of economic path ahead of them, and they learned how to become software quality assurance analysts and got great jobs at great companies. And in the process, I learned what it meant to go from nothing into a business that was cash flow positive. And my takeaways were, first, that I hated the 0 to 1. I hated trying to find product market fit. It was just brutal. It was, to me, it just felt like I was walking around in the darkness, grasping at things. And eventually we found product market fit. And then I started to have a ton of fun because then I was leading, I was growing an organization, I was solving problems. It was super difficult, but it was really rewarding to me. And my big takeaway from that was that I loved risk and I loved the grind of building a business, of leading people, of solving problems and creating value in the world. But I hesitate to call me an entrepreneur because I view entrepreneurs as people who think of an idea that doesn't exist yet and then create it out of nowhere, not knowing if anybody wants to buy it, if it's solving any problem that people have. And so I give all the respect in the world to the people, including my dad and both of my brothers who have done this, where you just go from 0 to 1. And it's this journey that for them, I think is very rewarding, that finding product market fit is almost like that end justifies this like brutal journey. And for me, finding product market fit was the beginning of the journey that I was interested in, and the end of just a torturous experience that I didn't want to repeat. And so that was my learning from that. And so I ended up going to business school, and while I was there, learning about the idea of buying existing businesses. And I loved it because then that meant I could be a part of a smaller business. I could help lead it and grow it and be on the front lines of it. But it already had identified and secured product market fit. It was already a growing and healthy organization, and I could just contribute my efforts to it and take the risk of buying it. And that started off my journey of what some people call entrepreneurship through acquisition. And for me, just means buying small to medium-sized businesses and getting my hands dirty and helping continue the work that some other founder who I deeply respect, did to get through that 0 to 1.
Yeah. So Roller Shield is not your first acquisition, right?
Correct.
So tell us about the first, or maybe the previous, whichever. I don't remember if there's one in between or if there's just the one before this. But
there were a couple
tell
almosts, but
Okay.
I acquired a engineering services business in 2018 that we owned until it was sold about a year ago in May of 2022. So that was it started off with the process of searching for businesses in Arizona who had owners who wanted to sell. And typically that looks like, an owner who's been running the business for a long time and wants to retire. And maybe we'll get into this further in the conversation, but when you're a business owner who's ready to hang up your spurs, there are people who will see that as exclusively an economic and financial transaction. You have this thing that you built, it has value, you got to find somebody to buy it, and then you can retire. And most of the business owners I meet and talk to, and what I relate to myself, is that a business is a deeply human enterprise, and it is not exclusively a financial commodity. And so I was looking for people, and I continue to look for people who are business owners who are aware that money comes with faces. that when you sell your business, it's a lot more than selling an asset. And my value that I think I bring, and what I communicated to business owners when I was searching originally in 2017, is that I'm a person, I'm not a financial institution. I have a passion for the human element of businesses, and I'm going to be here for a while. My family's all here in Phoenix. I love building businesses over a long period of time, and I'm here to grow a business that you are ready to sell and for your well-deserved retirement. And so I was searching around Phoenix for businesses that fit that profile, and I ended up finding and buying this engineering services business in 2018. And it was a great experience. It was a little bit of a bumpier journey than I expected, which, when I bought it, I was really hoping for a longer experience than a 4-year ownership. But for a number of reasons, it made a lot of sense to have the sale happen. But with Roller Shield, this is a company that I'm really excited about. I acquired it 6 months ago. I met the owners 5 years ago, and just had stayed in touch with them, and it was time for them to retire. And so I bought the business, and I'm looking forward to growing it and making it thrive over decades. We've been around for 45 years, and I'm hoping to own it and grow it and run it for many decades to come. But we'll get into more of that.
Yeah, for sure. So one quick question, then I'll make a comment, just because I find this interesting with different people that we interview on the show, and then just in my own personal life. But what is your wife's background and what is her feeling about entrepreneurship, business ownership, the risk taking, all those sorts of things?
It's a great question, and it's a very the answer makes a big impact. I have I've been really blessed to marry someone who grew up in a household that not of a entrepreneur starting something from scratch, but certainly of my wife's dad, my father-in-law, has a long career in running businesses and occasionally running, hard businesses or businesses that need a lot of work. And so my wife's mental map of what it means to take risk is and to lead businesses was one that was pretty accurate in terms of long hours occasionally and having to be on call whenever and traveling and all of that. But thankfully also seeing the upside and seeing how that hard work resulted in prosperity and a lot of great outcomes, both for her family and for the people who were on that journey with her dad. So thankfully that meant that she just has a kind of innate understanding of how hard it is, what it takes, why it's meaningful along the journey, and why it can be really beneficial at the end, and what kind of value it can produce along the way.
Yeah. Yeah. And she understands some of the difficulties that are involved as well. And, time away from the family, those sorts of things. And so I'm sure it certainly makes the journey easier as one who's been married almost 25 years. So we celebrate 25 years next month.
Congratulations.
Yeah, thank you. Congrats to you on the 10. But my wife did not come from an entrepreneurial family. It was not, I mean, her father worked for the same company for 26 years, is still living today on a pension, and he's been retired longer than he worked.
Must be nice.
Right. And so it's a completely different, background. And so that has been a struggle throughout the years for us, for my wife to understand it, to feel comfortable with it. And anytime there's a change or a new acquisition or anything that we're kind of looking at, those same feelings of concern and reticence, come back up to the surface. And so it does make a difference. And it's certainly something that you have to have a discussion with and an understanding before you jump into an acquisition or starting a new business, regardless, because the divorce rate is high in our country, period, but it's higher for business owners. And that's a big part of it, is that they're not communicating about it and understanding, what the impacts are to the family.
It's a very good thing to keep in mind, and the stakes are really high.
Yeah. The other thing I want to make a comment on that you talked about is, the human element. It's not just a financial transaction. And, in our business, we'll spend a lot of time with business owners who have been operating the businesses that you're looking at buying, right? So they've operated a long time. They've built it from the ground up. Maybe there's 30, 35, 50 employees that work for them now. They're responsible for people's, way of life and, all sorts of things. But that business truly becomes their baby, right? I mean, they literally raised it from the beginning and from birth, so to speak. And it's hard to walk away. And so we spend time, obviously on the financial side. Are you ready? How much do we need to sell this for in order to be able to have you be financially independent for the rest of your life? Blah, 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 right? But I give presentations throughout the country where I talk specifically about the emotional readiness of walking away from that business, which I would say is even more important than the financial readiness, because phone stops ringing, or you're not the one making the decisions anymore. You're not the one in charge. You've got to be emotionally ready and know for you what's next. And then part of that is what you were talking about, where you've got to feel comfortable that by you walking away the way that you're walking away, that the people that you care about are also being taken care of.
Yeah, because it's one thing to decide and to be emotionally ready for that departure of this big thing from your life, but you're going to be around afterwards. You're not going to stop caring about that business, and then more importantly, those people. And the good news is that, especially in the last 7 to 10 years, there is a really long menu of buyers that a business owner has, of different profiles of who they can sell their business to. It's a seller's market when it comes to small to medium-sized businesses and selling them. And you've got to have a rubric for what matters to you, because certainly the price matters. You've got to know what you're selling for. You've got to know what terms they are. Is it going to be all cash? Is it going to be, equity, where you're going to be kind of joined at the hip to whoever's buying the business, and if they do well, you'll do well, and if they do poorly, you're going to be, out of luck. But it even gets down to just these individuals, the people who are going to be buying the business, who are going to be in the business, and how do they make decisions, and what are their values. And one thing that when I talk to business owners, I always try to emphasize is that when you're talking to people who are thinking about buying your business, truly just dive deep into what their incentives are. What are the things that are constraining them based off of where their money comes from and who they are? Because there's a really big difference between, I guess on one extreme would be just an individual who has a ton of money, who wants to buy your business entirely with their own money, and they're going to run it for you. And then on the extreme end, somebody who has a ton of money that they've already promised back to the original investors within 3 years of the date that they're talking to you. No matter who that person is, if they're representing other investors' money that is guaranteed to go back to those investors in a short period of time, it doesn't matter what they think. They've made commitments. They have to get that money back to those investors, and they may be able to pay the highest price. But if you're the business owner, really explore, what is the incentive of this person? What is the incentive of this buyer? Are you part of a larger portfolio where they're tempted or incentivized to just go for a 0 or a 100, kind of like just push your business to the max, and if it works out, great, and if it crashes and fails, that's fine, because they've got 10 other businesses that are probably going to work out? Or is it, one of two or one of one that this person or this firm is going to buy? And so that's the whole education. It's just, if you're a business owner, you decide that, how much money you need, like you said, decide that you're emotionally ready to no longer be the head guy or gal of the business, but then think about what you think of as important. What is your rubric for who's going to buy the business? Because I can tell you from firsthand experience what it feels like to be writing a recommendation letter for a wonderful employee who the people who bought your business, decided that wasn't actually that wonderful, or didn't value them for who they were or what they were doing. And it doesn't feel great to be doing that, even though you're safely out of the business or whatever it is. There is still going to be a business there that continues after you, and it could go well or poorly. It could be going in a way that enhances your legacy and makes you feel really proud, and it can do the exact opposite too. And largely that has to do with who's going to be the buyer.
Yeah. So let's unpack that a little bit more, right? I mean, there are pros and cons of each different kind of buyer, and you've kind of talked about some of those along the way without really saying, the difference between a search fund or a VC or private equity group or an individual buyer or strategic. There's a lot of different buyers out there, and there are pros and cons to both. So maybe kind of unpack, one or two pros and cons for what you consider the most common, or at least what your experience has been along the way.
Well, if we're talking about mature businesses, so businesses that are positive cash flow, that are profitable, that have been around for a while, we'll set aside VC, angel, kind of these more kind of startup-y capital sources. And then there's the spectrum of, I'll call it from an individual all the way to, let's call it a private equity fund. And I'll start with the private equity fund, because I think a lot that people are getting a lot more familiar with that term. And the commonalities there are that is a fund. It is usually a couple managing partners who have raised money from limited partners, LPs. And so they say to these investors, they say, all right, we're going to take your money and invest it into a variety of businesses. We're going to grow them, and we think that we're going to hit a 30% annual return. You will get your money after 7 years. So we're going to call your capital, we'll invest it. You're not going to see any of that money until 7 years from now, and we are projecting that you'll get 30% returns every year over those 7 years. And that's not really going to change, because if you're that investor who's not going to really be involved, you're giving that money, and you want to make sure you get that money back in 7 years. You're not going to say, well, you know what, if you think you should run this thing for 20 years and that's the best use of these funds, you should do that. That's not how it works. It's 7 years, get the money back to me. And those can be really exciting business owners, because they have a lot of money, and they're going to make money on growing your business as fast as possible. And so they're going to invest money to make that happen. It's not just that they're going to stamp down on the gas pedal without putting, a little extra something in the fuel tank. They will stamp down on the gas pedal, and they will spend the money to put in, whatever you want to put into the fuel to make it go faster. But every single business owner I've ever met knows that there's a reason why you don't grow a business to its maximum extent all the time. Growth is terrifying and chaotic, and it breaks everything. It's very exciting, and it creates a lot of value. But I never begrudge a business owner who's only growing 5% a year, when theoretically they could grow 50% a year if they just, marketed more. Growing like that, growing at 30% a year, or whatever it is extremely challenging. And if people burn out, systems break, customers get upset. And so that's the private equity side, is that they have a mission, they have a legal obligation to grow whatever they buy very quickly, and to return the capital at the end of that journey. So I would say that's kind of the fund structure, the private equity. Then there's things called family offices, which is high net worth individuals. That's long-term capital usually. These are people who made a lot of money doing something else, and now they're investing. And they'll have a professional team that works for that family that is investing the money for them. But the important thing is that it's just their money. So they can invest for 30 years if they want, and there's nobody that they promise the money back to. And so that's nice. They typically aren't the most proactive investors. So they're usually, in family offices, frequently invest in private equity funds, or kind of are at a secondary level, but occasionally they'll be the ones buying themselves. There are things called search funds, which is what I was using back in 2018. That's a concept of someone gets a little bit of money up front from investors to fund their search for a business. And then those original investors have a right to provide the capital for the purchase. So that in that sense, it's not a fund in the sense that there's no guaranteed return of capital. If they want to hold on to the business for a long time, they can. But the incentives of the searcher are that they won't see any big payout until they sell the business. So the plus is that the fund doesn't have a promised end date, where in 7 years, the LPs need their money back and we're selling this business, whether it's going great or going poorly. Instead, it's the searcher, the person who finds the business, who buys the business, and who then runs the business, who is thinking to themselves, I'm not going to get a big payout until I sell this business. And so that tends to be something where the hold ends up being around 5 to 7 years, because that's the incentive. And again, I don't want to sound like a broken drum, but there's a real value to knowing these incentives if you're the business owner. Really explore, okay, you want to buy my business? Tell me who provided your money, what promises or obligations do you have back to them, and what is your incentive structure? How do you make money as the person who's going to be running the business or buying it or whatever?
Yep.
And then I'd say the final maybe category is kind of other types of, I guess you'd call them, searchers. That's kind of what I was for this second acquisition, where it's really just me. I have a little bit of money from family and friends and other investors, but it's primarily me putting in a big chunk of my life savings to buy the business. And I used an SBA loan to finance the acquisition. And with that kind of structure, and with any of these structures, there's also choices for the business owner about providing a seller note to help provide the financing for it. And you have a lot of power as the business owner to kind of bridge the gaps between some of these different profiles. So if you wanted to sell to somebody, let's say you want to sell to a key employee who you think is 100% ready to run the business, they probably don't have all the money that you need to buy the business in cash from you. But what you could do is you could provide them a loan, basically. And then over the course of 10 years, they're buying the business from you at a market price, at a price that is completely fair. But because they don't have the capital, they need some help and they need some financing. And so that's a way for business owners that I think is a little bit, it's usually framed as, I just want to get the biggest cash offer I can up front and optimize for maximum cash now. I think that a lot of business owners would be well served to think about how they have a lot of power to decide what kind of buyer they want, and they can decide to provide seller notes or leave equity in the business. There's a whole number of things that business owners can do to help make sure that they get the person they want, or the type of person or type of entity they want to buy their business.
Yeah, no, I think that was a great summary of the different options and talking about the pros and cons there, because that is the reality. It's typically not just about the dollar amount. Every seller goes into it thinking it's about the dollar amount, but when you get into it and you start to look at all the different ways that it can be structured and the risk that you're taking on or not taking on, and that each of those have a cost to them as well. And then, I had a conversation with a client recently about, this is the name of your business today. That's important to you because you came up with that. There's a personal tie to you and that name. But if a private equity group came in today and they offered you your number, the number that you just told me was your number to walk away, and the very next day they fired all of your people and changed the name to this, which is just the opposite of what's important to you about your name, how do you feel?
Yeah.
Right. And we literally unpacked that for about 20 minutes. You got to understand what you're giving up if you're doing it a certain way, and what control you've given up. And if you're okay with that, that's fine. There's not a right or a wrong answer here, right? Yeah. You just need to understand what it is that you're committing to, and potentially putting your name, your background, your reputation, and your employees through.
Yeah, and I think it might be worth mentioning, I think my friends who work in private equity probably want a little bit more of a fairer shake. And maybe the fairer shake is that if you're a business owner and you've still got 7 years in you to run this business, selling to private equity and running it with private equity people who you really like. I mean, there's a whole spectrum of humans out there, and it applies to private equity as well. They're bad and good. But let's say you find a private equity partner who you really just enjoy, your values are aligned, you get along with them, you think that you could ride this out with them for 7 to 10 more years. They're going to inject so much capital into the business. They're going to bring new skill sets and new vision. Like, if you're a business owner and you want to kind of have a accelerating final 10 years of your journey and see what could become of your business if it was kind of put onto jet fuel, that could be really exciting for you. And you might be willing to go through the bumps that go with that. And maybe you're going to end up having to get rid of some people who, are not the right fits for that kind of a journey. But it is entirely up to your preferences, because you could take two business owners with the exact same business, and one of them, it's an awesome idea to sell to private equity because they'll get a great ride out of it. They'll get some great cash out of it. And it might be the worst idea for the other business owner who wants legacy, who wants to doesn't want to be in the business anymore after the next 12 months and wants their people to be taken care of. So it really, it's so individualized. The only shame is if you don't do that thinking. If you're selling to private equity thinking that you're finishing in the next year and they're going to treat your people like you do, that's the only wrong answer. Is that if you haven't explored, okay, what are their incentives, what are they going to do, what is the impact of that? And then if you've got clear eyes, then more power to you.
Yep. No, you're absolutely right, because that is a fair assessment, and there can be, it really comes down to what you want to do. Like you said, if you want to have that exciting journey where they're injecting capital and you're building something that you maybe dreamt of, but you weren't sure quite how to do it, or you didn't have the access to the capital to do it, and you can be involved in that can be a great way to finish your career and kind of go out on a high. But at the same time, typically when you're doing that, you're taking some chips off the table, right? So they're buying somewhere between 50 and 80% typically in that type of a scenario. So you're selling that much and then holding on to, call it, the remaining 20 to 50%. And we see it all the time that at the end of those 7 years, that 20 or 50% that you retained was actually worth more than your first transaction, right? So it can be a great thing financially, and it can be fun to do it along the way if you have the right partners.
Exactly.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so let's see here. Let's kind of go for you step by step as to how you think somebody who's listening that's thinking, I want to acquire a business. What should be the first steps and things that they should be looking at, thinking about?
It's a great question, and it's something that is becoming increasingly popular. And I think that's because there's a lot of folks who started businesses in the 70s and 80s, and they're ready to retire. And there's a lot of businesses out there that are going to be changing hands. And there's a lot of people who want to get out of the corporate world and to have something that they can call their own. So that's now the flavors, just like how there's so many flavors of buyers, there are so many flavors to what it means to buy a business. If I were talking to somebody who's really just thinking, okay, hey, conceptually, I want to buy a business, the first questions I would ask are, what kind of business do you want to run? Well, I guess the first question is, do you know what you're doing at all? Because there's a lot of people who might be, lifelong corporate folks who dream of buying a business, but when they actually, if they were to live my day or any business owner's day for a couple of days, they would immediately realize they would hate the job. So first is like really get out of the abstract and into the reality of, do you really want to be an operator and leader in a business that's small or medium sized? But then you want to figure out how big you want it, because there's a huge difference between a 100 or 200 person employee business and being the leader and owner of that business, and being the leader and owner of a 10 employee business. And then from there, you would then decide how you can structure it based off of how much money you have. Because if you're looking for a large company, that's call it $5 million in profit or $3 million in profit, you're going to probably need a lot of outside investors and debt partners. And so then you're in this kind of sophisticated world where you're going to need a lot of folks who are by your side to provide capital and expertise. And so then I would encourage you to look into search funds as a method of doing that, because there's a whole community of investors and providers and partners who are doing this, and that's really exciting. If you're more experienced in terms of, if you have 2 decades of experience in an industry or a field, then I would encourage you to look into what's called the independent sponsor model. And that's where you can partner with a family office, like what we were just talking about, and you can find a business, and then maybe you just have the family office provide all the capital, and you can run the business. So that's on the larger side. But if what you're interested in is the idea of a company that has 10 or 25 or 30 employees, that's more like $1.5 million in profit or less, then there's this whole world of SBA loans that are these really favorable methods of financing, where you can you personally guarantee the loan, because that's a little bit scary. But on the other hand, it's a way for you to buy a business that's relatively highly levered, that isn't as risky. So as an example would be, SBA 7A acquisition loan is a 10-year loan, and most businesses can only access a 5-year commercial loan, especially for an acquisition, unless you're talking about a big one. And so if you think about buying a business that's 70% debt with an SBA loan, because it's double the term of a typical commercial loan, 70% sounds like a really levered up business. But if you think of it as the 35% leverage in terms of what the actual burden on the business is on a month-to-month basis, it's a lot less risky. And it's because the SBA is a government program that it allows for more stability and allows for those longer terms. So that would be a whole world to explore, as well as the idea of doing an SBA loan to buy a business for yourself. But there are so many different flavors, because you can envision a world where if you have a business that you really like, you could be an apprentice to the owner for a year and then buy it slowly over 5 years after that, or something. There are so many ways to buy a business. The really important things are, know that you actually want to do that, understand what size of a business you're looking for, and therefore the type of financing available, and then just go for it, because it is a wonderful journey, and it is a very meaningful thing to continue the journey that somebody else started. In my case, at Roll Shield, it's 45 years of history, and I get to be the one to carry it forward, and to steward it into the future. So I think it's an extremely meaningful career path.
Yeah. So maybe just give us a little bit more information for the listener's sake on the SBA loan side, right? So you talk about the 7A version. It's a 10-year loan, which, you know, it's shorter than a mortgage, right? And a
Yep.
lot of these acquisitions, you're acquiring a business for more than you have for your own mortgage.
Yep.
So there is, you know, that added risk, and you're looking at that number and thinking that that's, you know, that's risky, but kind of break down, you know, not that you know every aspect of it, but break down what's a typical down payment percentage? How do the interest rates work? Is it principal and interest repayment? You know, those sorts of things.
Yep.
So those listeners understand that.
Yeah, so the SBA 7A loan is an acquisition loan. It is meant for this kind of an acquisition. And like I said, it's a 10-year term. But because let me back up to how the government's involved in this loan. The Small Business Administration, the SBA, provides a 75% guarantee to local commercial banks for that loan. So the government basically says, all right, we want to incentivize you, local bank, to make loans to people who might seem like they're a little bit riskier than the norm. But to kind of make it worth your while, we will say that if that person goes down, if that business dies, we will compensate the bank for 75% of the loan value. So it's a lot less risky to the bank. That also means that the banks are the ones making the loans. It's not the SBA. And that's an important distinction. So if you want to look into this, I really would recommend a preferred SBA lender. I've worked with a handful of them. I know Live Oak Bank is one, First Bank of the Lake. There's a bunch of them that are on a list of approved of like people. You can actually pull the numbers on how many loans each bank makes each year under the SBA 7A program. And so I would just go with the bank that does hundreds or dozens of these a year. And so that's the kind of mechanism behind it. So that allows the bank to do a 10-year term. And then the interest rate can be fixed or variable. That's up to the bank. In most cases, it's variable. And in this interest rate environment, you kind of don't want to. This is a great loan that you may not want to refinance because you got a 10-year term. So having a variable in this environment actually is kind of acceptable. Whereas 2 years ago, I would not have been excited about variable. And the rate it's not the lowest rate, but it's also not astronomical. There's a slight premium on it that compared to typical commercial debt, but it's not unaffordable. And it is principal and interest payments every month. What's interesting is that you can pay down the principal, and the payments will change. So unlike your mortgage, where if you're going to pay down your principal faster, your payment stays the same. You just kind of end paying, making payments earlier. With the SBA 7A, if you pay off half your loan right away, your payments go down by half. So that's a nice mechanism as well. And there's no prepayment penalty or anything like that. But anybody who owns more than 20% of the business has to sign the personal guarantee. And that's usually that's the hang up that a lot of people have, and what I had for a long time. Because in my example, this is not uncommon. The principal of the loan is more than my net worth. And so the personal guarantee is less about recouping funds. And remember, federal government is the one backing the loan for the majority, but they really want to know that your skin is in the game. And so that's one of the key things about the SBA 7A program.
Yeah,
but it's a great program, and it's been around for decades.
Yeah, been around for a long time. It's the government's version or way of backing business owners and trying to push forward the building of jobs in our country. So last question that you didn't hit on was what's a typical down payment that they're looking at for an SBA loan?
I think the minimum down payment is technically the minimum is 5% if the seller is putting down some money, but I think in general, think of it as a 10% down payment. I would, but what I did was, for example, 70% of my acquisition was an SBA loan, another 10% was a seller note, and then 20% of the acquisition was equity. So, and something that I should note, because I think a lot of business owners, when you talk to your banker, and if, or let's say somebody wants to buy your business and they say they want to do an SBA 7A loan, and you talk to your banker or your lawyer, you're going to hear their first thing they're going to say is, oh, it's going to take 6 months. The SBA is a disaster. It's going to be horrible. The paperwork will be insane. And that is true if you don't go, if the person who's buying the business and getting the loan is not working with a very experienced preferred SBA lender. In my case, I closed my acquisition of Roller Shield took 90 days. Now that was, and the only reason it took that long was because we wanted to close at year end. We could have closed at 75 days. And that was with an SBA loan. It did not take 6 months. You just got to follow the directions and be with a banker who does this multiple times a week. But if you go with a banker who does this twice a year, and you're not locked in, that could easily take 6 months. So I just wanted, sometimes it gets a bad rap among business owners and the people who are advising them. It can be terrible, but if you are working with a great bank and the person is on top of it, it does not have to slow down an acquisition.
Yeah, for sure. Matter of fact, last episode or maybe 2 episodes ago, my business partner Landon and I recorded an episode together, and we talked about an acquisition that he recently made using an SBA 7A loan, and I believe that they were approved and ready to fund in 45 to 60 days.
Yeah, it does not have to be brain damage, but
Yeah.
it seems like every lawyer and banker who's involved in buying businesses has at least one horror story about it, and they tend to grab onto that. So
Yeah.
don't lose confidence, because some people have made the poor decision of doing an SBA loan with a banker who has not done it very often, and therefore it took half a year.
Yeah. All right. So I think final question I've got for you today, and then I'll have you tell us a little bit about what Roller Shield is, so that people who are listening that may benefit from your services can learn about that as well. But in your opinion, what are the most common mistakes that owners make when they're trying to sell their business? Meaning, what are they doing that's actually scaring buyers off?
That's a great question. So the things that I come across most often when I'm talking to business owners, first is customer concentration. That is the fastest way for a deal to get kind of sideways. Is if you have any single customer that is above 10%, or even if you say, your top 3 to 5 customers, if they're more than 20% of your revenue, that's just going to scare everybody. And you should just know that either you're going to have to take a haircut on the price, or get really kind of creative with what to do about that. Or if you've still got a few years before you want to sell, just start diversifying. I know, and as a business owner, I know how nice it is to have these big customers. You know them super well, you're serving them super well, and they're growing. And it's not your fault that they doubled their order this year and they're now 40%. Like that's a great thing to have as a business owner. But just be aware of how people who are trying to buy a business see it. They see it as if one person at that one customer has a friend who has a business in the same industry and wants to send their business there, all of a sudden, you're in a world of hurt. So that's probably the most common thing that comes in the way. I'd say the second thing is just kind of who are your key employees? Because first of all, if you're the key employee, if your business cannot function, if you were to go on a vacation for 2 weeks and leave your computer and phone at home, if your business is going to be like hurting when you come back, you are not ready to sell the business. You've got to document things. You've got to hire people or empower people to make sure that, if you're going to sell your business, know that you can take 2 weeks off and it's not going to be a problem. It's fine if your company relies on you, and maybe you're an expert about something and you still are the owner. But the point is, you don't want to be so involved in the business that a couple weeks of your absence is going to cause problems. So really try to do that. And then if there's any key employees, again, small businesses, you can't have 100 employees and you've nicely spread all the risk across everybody so that nobody can leave without causing a problem. But if you do have a couple of key employees, making sure that everything's documented, and then looping them in, or as part of the transaction, having some sort of retention bonus or some way for the buyer to say, you know what, I'm not worried that this one person is going to leave on day one and suddenly the business is imploding. So I'd say, customer concentration, I'd say key person, including you, as a risk. And then just try to have, the cleaner your financials are, the better. It's worth investing. I know how awful it is to pay CPAs to do things like reviews and audits, and it can be horrible. But you will get so much value if your books are clean. If you don't have a really professional bookkeeper and accountant, you start doing that now, because the cleaner your books are, you are going to be buying yourself more people who want to buy your business, therefore more leverage about what terms you get. The messier it is, the more people are going to be scared away from the onset, and the more room there is for negotiation. And kind of, if there's lack of clarity, then that means an area for buyers to start negotiating. And if you've got nice, clean books, and the way that they get unclean is by not having the right people cleaning them, organizing them. You know, you don't really need to do an audit, but an audit would help. But certainly reviewed financials by an external firm. But then also, it's, you know, personal expenses. One of the most common issues is, if you've been running a ton of personal expenses through your business, you might think that it's obvious that those are personal and that they won't be needed after the next person buys the business. But every banker and lawyer and service provider will say that, you know, who's to say that all those credit card charges of you going traveling isn't actually, you're traveling with key clients, and that's how you retain clients, and the next owner needs to spend that kind of money to retain clients. Or all those meals that you say are just like your family, you know, going out to eat, are actually, you know, your sales reps, you know, having key meetings. So one of the things that, for example, RollShields owners did was that they had a hard line of nothing personal went through the business. And that meant that I, as the buyer, had a simpler time. There was no negotiation about whether X expense should be counted against the financials or if that really should be put back in. The cleaner it is, the fewer things that you have to like add back and to say, well, actually, if I weren't the owner, I wouldn't have hired this person because, you know, I only hired them because of X, Y, Z. And it's like, well, if you're going to hire your daughter-in-law to be at the business, like, she should be doing a real job. And if she's not, there's no way you're going to prove that she wasn't doing a real job to the satisfaction of a buyer. So I'd say that's probably the third biggest thing, is just keep clean books, keep personal expenses out of the business if you want to sell. I'm not here to commentate on if you're putting personal stuff through the business. The point is, if you're trying to sell it, you will end up having a harder time and a lower price the more that there's personal stuff going through the business.
Yeah. Yeah, and I would just add that on the flip side of that, if you're getting ready to sell the business yourself and you are running all of those personal expenses through the business, you better darn well understand what you are running through the business and how that affects your own personal finances as well, because you may be planning to need $8,000 a month to live, but in reality, you didn't factor in all the stuff that was going through the business that you're now going to have to pick up on your own. And you've got to be able to afford that as well with your own financial calculations.
Yep, that's very true.
Yeah, looks like my video froze, so I'm not sure what's going on there, but it sounds like you can still hear me. So
yeah, I can still hear you.
We'll keep rolling for that. But the other thing I'll just mention real quick is, you talked about if you can't walk away from the business for 2 weeks and leave your computer and phone at home without having a problem, you're probably not ready to. We look at that as owner dependence, right? And we actually take our clients through an owner dependency index score to find out just how dependent that business is on them, because it's a factor as to whether or not you're ready to sell, and it can affect the sale price regardless.
Yeah, and also it beyond that, it also affects your level of freedom post close, because if you envision a world where you have a president running the business for you and you're basically kind of a board member and you check in once a quarter, you will definitely be able to sell that business and walk away basically day 1 or day 30, because it's this kind of thing that is operating on its own. If you are dependent on the business, you might still be able to sell, but are you ready to be required to work there for 3 years under new owners? Because that's what that's going to be expected and required, is to say, well, it looks like this business kind of depends on you. If you want to sell it, then you're not leaving. Yeah. And a lot of business owners will chafe at that, rightfully so. So, it might seem expensive to hire a president and get them all ramped up, and that's a big salary. But what's it worth it to you to be able to say, you know what, I'm going to sell my business. You've got everybody. It's a full package. You don't need me, and I'll see you 30 days after close, and I'll be off to my vacation.
Yep, absolutely. All right, well, let's close this out for us, Derek, and just tell us, what RollaShield actually does day to day for people who may be listening and say, oh, well, it was a really cool interview, but I could also be interested in what RollaShield offers.
Yeah, for sure. So RollaShield, we fabricate and install external rolling shutters. So these are the metal shutters that are motorized that roll down over a window or a door. So most people think of them as maybe things you would put in front of a storefront, so to protect a store after closing hours. And that is what we do, but we also do a lot of residential work because these are great security products. You can just roll them down when you go off on vacation or when you're away or even overnight. But they're also great insulation. So in Arizona, because of the heat, when you close these things, it blocks about 70% of the heat from getting into your windows or through your doors. And they're great privacy and blackout. Right now on my house, when my kids are napping, it is completely black in their room because the shutter blocks it all out. So that's what RollaShield does. We've done it for 45 years, 45 years. And we fabricate here in Phoenix, we install in Phoenix, and we ship nationwide. And then my kind of investing side of the world is Chaparral Capital. And that's really just me. And I'm still looking around always for great businesses in Arizona and throughout the Southwest, because I just love this stuff. I love taking businesses that have a great history and then getting my hands dirty, helping them grow for a long time. And so I guess if any of your listeners are interested in rolling shutters, go to rollashield.com. And if you're interested in talking about, selling your business or even talking more in depth about what the different profiles of buyers are, I'd love to chat with you. I love talking to business owners. This podcast is a great example of hearing from people like you. So you can reach out to me. I'm at Chaparral Cap, CHAPARRALCAP.com. And hope to maybe meet some people through this, and just wish you the best, whether you're looking to buy a business, looking to sell a business, or just looking to keep growing your business. It's all a great adventure.
Yeah, very cool. Really appreciate the information. Appreciate, talking with you, Derek. I think that you have a great way of explaining things and making people understand, what may seem as complex topics and making them simple and easy to understand. So I really appreciate that.
Yeah, well, thanks a lot for having me.
Yeah, and then just last thing, just kind of give the listeners an idea, like a basic window on a normal, house. What does it cost to put a shield on that window?
Yeah, so for a motorized shield on a typical bedroom window, that would be around $1,500 to $1,700, I would say. But we also have folks who enclose a whole patio, and that might be, a bit more than that, around 5,000 or something like that.
Gotcha. Very cool. All right. Well, thanks again so much for being here. Really appreciated the time together. And now all of a sudden my video's back up. So, that's great.
Well, thanks a lot for having me, and all the best to your listeners as well.
Yeah, you bet. Thanks, Derek.
You've been listening to Tycoons of Small Biz, a podcast for small business owners by small business owners. Join us next week for an introduction to another great tycoon, and be sure to follow us on our social media channels for links to all of our episodes and great content.